The night Scarlet's parents sold her was the night her life began to unravel. At 26, deaf and disregarded, she never imagined her fate would be sealed by a cruel bargain. But as the Alpha King strode into her life, everything would change. And not just because of the deal her father made. It was because he chose her. Welcome to SFE Power Love Story, your home for all love stories. Hit the subscribe buttons to join our community. The heavy footsteps thudded through the house, shaking the thin walls of my room like an earthquake. I had no need to hear them. The vibrations in the floor told me everything I needed to know. The Alpha King had arrived. I pressed my palm against the cold window pane, feeling the tremors in the wood as the convoy of black cars pulled up in front of the Crimson Fang Pack's estate. The sounds of the night had already quieted in anticipation. The wolves, the pack members who considered themselves my family, they too held their breath, watching the procession unfold. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. I felt it deep in my bones, the arrival of power, and with it, the feeling that something was about to change.
I closed my eyes for a moment, focusing on the rhythm of my heart. I couldn't hear the thunder of the engines, nor the low rumble of voices, but I could feel everything. The air was charged, tense, crackling like static electricity, and I could sense it all. Something dangerous was coming, something that would change everything. The Alpha King. Alpha King Kai, the man whose name alone was enough to stir fear and awe across the Northern Territories. I could hear my mother's voice in my mind, laced with her usual disdain. "Why couldn't you be like the others, Scarlet?" she would say. "Why couldn't you hear? Why couldn't you be normal?" But tonight, that wouldn't matter. Tonight, they were selling me. Not to the highest bidder, but to the one who would pay the debt my father owed to the crown. I could barely suppress the bitter taste in my mouth. My parents had spent my entire life treating me as a burden, a flaw in their perfect image, a child they couldn't parade at social events, a daughter they could never showcase with pride. I was defective. At least, that's what they'd always made me feel. My fingers curled into a fist as I watched the doors of the convoy open. Shadows began to spill out, and I could sense the heavy weight of authority in each step. My father, Beta Marcus, appeared at the entrance of the house, his face a mask of forced composure. I could see his hands trembling, but he made no move to wipe the sweat from his brow. He had always been the picture of stoicism, until now. I turned away from the window and stepped back into the dimly lit room, the floor creaking under my feet. I didn't know what to expect. My parents had made it clear enough. This was happening whether I wanted it or not. Their disappointment in me was nothing new, but now it was being put on display for the entire world to see. The door burst open with a violent swing, and my mother stood in the doorway, her eyes sharp with something cold, something I had never seen before. It wasn't disdain this time. It was calculation. Her lips curled into a tight, mirthless smile. "Get up, Scarlet," she signed sharply, her hands exaggerated in their movements. "The Alpha King is here. You're going to the capital."
I froze, my heart hammering. Me? Why would he want me? The words tumbled in my mind, but I dared not speak them. My mother's expression twisted even further as she signed back, her fingers fast and hard against the air. "He doesn't know yet, darling, but your father made a deal. You're going with him to settle our debt." The weight of her words sank in, cold and suffocating. They had sold me to settle their debts, to make their problems disappear. I couldn't find the words, not that it mattered. What could I say that would change anything? The corners of her mouth curled upward in a cruel mockery of a smile. "Consider it your first useful contribution to this family. I could hardly breathe as I stared at her, my hands shaking. It was happening, just like that. No warning, no choice. My life, my future, my body. It had all been bargained away in exchange for something I couldn't even understand, something I had no control over. But the worst part was, I wasn't even surprised. For years, I had been nothing but a shadow in this house, a daughter who couldn't even hear her own pack's howls, let alone join them. My parents had never understood me, had never even tried. They had simply looked at me as if I were a problem, a mistake in the perfect fabric of their lives. Now, I was nothing more than an object, a means to an end. I was being sold. I stared at the floor, blinking back the stinging tears that threatened to spill. My fists clenched, nails biting into the palms of my hands. I wouldn't cry. Not now. Not when I was already so far gone. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction.
I moved towards the wardrobe, not knowing what I was looking for, but needing something to occupy my hands. My mother didn't wait for me to respond. She left the door open, her steps echoing as she left me alone to face the inevitable. Minutes later, my father entered, his eyes shadowed with something dark. He said nothing, his usual authority missing, replaced by something fragile. It didn't matter. The deal had been made. I was already as good as gone. He cleared his throat, looking down at the papers in his hands. Papers I couldn't read, but I knew what they were. The contract. The price of my life. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask how. There were no words left between us that could change what had already been decided. The door opened again, and I felt him before I saw him. The Alpha King. His presence was undeniable, a force that seemed to bleed into every corner of the room. When he stepped into my line of sight, the air seemed to shift, cold and dense, as if everything in the room was suddenly holding its breath. He was everything they said he was. Towering, powerful, with eyes that gleamed like molten silver. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, and when he stepped forward, the weight of his presence pressed down on me, suffocating and sharp. He said nothing as he moved to stand before my father, who was already bowing, signing the contract with shaking hands. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze was cold, sharp, assessing, as if every inch of me was being weighed, calculated. Then, he turned his gaze to me. My heart skipped a beat. He didn't look at me with the usual disdain I had grown accustomed to. No, this was something different. His eyes softened, just for a moment, and then something unexpected happened. He signed. I froze, staring at his hands. They moved slowly, carefully, and his signs were precise, practiced. Hello, Scarlet. Can you understand me?
I blinked in shock. He was speaking to me in sign language. Alpha King Kai, the Alpha King, was speaking to me in my language. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. He had learned. I didn't know how to respond. My mouth went dry. My hands trembled as I raised them, signing back. Why me? His lips curled, but it wasn't quite a smile. There was something in his expression, something dark, as if there was a secret lurking behind his silver eyes. He signed again, his hands moving with a fluidity I had never expected. Because you're the only one who won't hear me scream at night. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Nightmares? The Alpha King, the powerful, ruthless leader of the Northern Territories, was telling me? He was telling me that he had nightmares? I could see my father's face twist with confusion. He was already speaking, demanding to know what was being said between us. But I didn't care. I couldn't. The words I had just read on his lips echoed in my mind, and my hands shook. Why me? I signed, again, more forcefully now, desperation creeping into my fingers. Kai's eyes flickered with something unreadable as he met my gaze. "Because I chose you," he signed. I sat in the back of the sleek black car, watching the world speed by in a blur of gray and green. The hum of the engine was the only sound that filled the space, but it did nothing to drown out the thoughts racing through my mind. The Alpha King had chosen me, not out of pity, not as part of a deal. No, Kai had said it himself. He chose me. I still couldn't make sense of it. It felt like a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. I was going to the capital, a place I had only heard about in hushed whispers, to live with a man who, by all rights, should have never looked my way. The soft leather seats creaked as I shifted, uncomfortable with the luxury around me. It wasn't the first time I'd been in a car this expensive, but this was different. This wasn't some business trip or a rare occasion when my father deigned to take me somewhere. No, this was my life, changing in an instant. It was my fate being decided without my say in the matter.
I caught a glimpse of the reflection in the darkened window, a face that had always been other, always been unwanted. My skin, too dark for my mother's taste, my hair, too wild for their standards. And now, deaf, a disability they could never accept. Yet somehow, this strange man who barely knew me had chosen me. Why me? The question lingered in my mind like a ghost. Why had he chosen a woman like me? Someone who couldn't even hear her own heartbeat, let alone the growl of wolves or the crackle of the forest around us. But then again, I had never truly been part of the pack. The window clicked down, letting in the crisp, cool night air. It smelled like pine, earth, and something ancient. The Northern Territories were a place of dark forests and craggy hills, where the wolves roamed free, and the rule of the strongest was law. It was a land steeped in tradition, and no one disobeyed the Alpha King. The seat next to me shifted, and I turned to find Kai sitting there, looking as imposing as ever. His silver eyes gleamed in the dim light, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge my presence directly, but I felt his gaze on me, burning, steady, like he was studying me. The car's interior was suffocating in its silence, but I couldn't bring myself to break it. What was there to say? He had already told me he had chosen me. He had already signed his name to the contract that bound us, though not in the way I had expected. He hadn't lied. He wasn't buying me. He was freeing me. But from what? From my family's cruelty? From my own feelings of worthlessness? I didn't know. He shifted in his seat, and I caught a flash of something else in his eyes. Something that didn't quite fit with the cold ruler everyone spoke of. It was a flicker of something vulnerable, something human. For the first time since I'd met him, I wondered who this man really was beneath the layers of control and power. I had no way of knowing. I was only a pawn in his world, just as I had been in my parents' life. But I couldn't deny it. There was something different about him. Something that, for the first time in my life, made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't just the broken, deaf daughter of Beta Marcus. My thoughts were interrupted as Kai's voice finally broke through the silence. His words were slow and deliberate, his lips moving with a controlled precision that made me realize he was signing before I could even focus on the sound. "You're wondering why, aren't you?" I nodded. My hands trembled slightly as I signed back, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Yes. Why me? Why choose me?" His lips curled into a faint smile, but it was distant. "Because I see something in you, something I haven't found in anyone else." "What is it?" I signed, my brow furrowing. "What do you see?"
He sighed, glancing out the window for a moment. "Strength. Resilience.
The way you've managed to survive all these years despite everything. I know what it's like to be underestimated, and I need someone who understands that. Someone who knows what it feels like to be seen as broken, when in fact, they're not. I stared at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. He was speaking to me as if I were like him, as if the very thing that had always made me feel like an outsider could actually be the reason he chose me. "I'm not strong," I signed, though I knew the words were a lie. "I'm weak." His eyes met mine, and his gaze softened. Not weak, just misunderstood. For a long moment, I couldn't say anything. The air between us seemed to thicken, filled with words neither of us had spoken. He didn't push me to answer or explain myself. He simply let the silence settle. I watched him for a moment longer, trying to reconcile the man before me with the rumors I had heard about him. The ruthless, cold alpha king. The man who had murdered his own uncle without batting an eye. The alpha who commanded the Northern Territories with an iron fist. But there was more to him than that. I could see it now, hidden beneath the surface. Something broken. Something deeply human. The car slowed as we neared the gates of the capital. The city was a world of its own, its lights glowing like fireflies in the distance. I had never been here before. The very thought of stepping foot in the capital, of becoming part of this world, filled me with a mixture of awe and dread. Kai, who hadn't spoken much during the drive, finally shifted beside me. His massive frame filled the space. As he opened the door and stepped out, I noticed the security detail at the entrance immediately straightened, their eyes flickering to him with a mixture of awe and fear. As I stepped out of the car, the cool night air kissed my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. The first thing I noticed was the sheer size of the palace. It was not just a house. It was a fortress, a sprawling complex of stone and glass that rose into the sky like something out of a fantasy novel. Its towers loomed over us, casting long shadows that stretched across the perfectly manicured grounds.
"You'll get used to it." Kai's voice startled me, his words laced with a strange warmth as he stepped beside me. I blinked, surprised that he was speaking to me now. He had been mostly quiet during the ride, his gaze distant and unreadable. But now, he seemed oddly relaxed, like he had slipped into a comfortable rhythm, as though he was the one who had lived here his entire life. I raised an eyebrow at him. "Used to this?" I signed, feeling a little absurd. What exactly am I supposed to get used to? The fact that I'm now a prisoner in your palace? Kai chuckled softly, the sound rich and deep, like the rumble of thunder in the distance. "No, Scarlet. I meant getting used to the size of everything. The halls, the people, the weight of it all. You'll see, it's not as bad as it seems." I snorted in disbelief. "You're telling me it's not as bad as it seems?" I motioned to the palace, the vastness of it overwhelming in a way that made my stomach tighten. "This place is like a fortress. You can't even see the sky from here. How is that not bad?" His eyes twinkled with amusement. "That's the point. When you're in power, you build high walls to keep the chaos out. Trust me, you'll get used to it." I narrowed my eyes at him, still unsure of his humor. For all his confidence and power, he seemed to have a surprisingly light touch when it came to me. It was disorienting, to say the least. Kai led me into the palace, his steps firm and sure as the massive doors creaked open to reveal the grand hall. It felt like walking into a cathedral, tall columns stretched to the ceiling, which was adorned with ornate chandeliers that glittered like stars. The floor was a smooth, polished marble, reflecting the soft glow of the candles that lined the walls. Everything about the space screamed wealth and influence. I tried not to gawk, but I couldn't help it. I had never seen anything like this before. The palace was intimidating, and I could feel its power pressing against me, suffocating in its intensity. We walked through the grand hall, and I noticed the wolves who worked here, maids, guards, servants, gathered at the edges, their eyes flicking toward Kai with reverence. No one dared to speak unless spoken to, and even then, their words were measured, careful, as if every syllable could carry weight. It was clear that Kai wasn't just the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. He was the very heartbeat of this palace, and everyone who lived here knew it. I felt like a small fish in a vast ocean, and I had no idea how I was supposed to navigate it. How could someone like me, someone who had never belonged anywhere, find a place in a world this massive? "Do you need anything, Scarlet?" Kai asked, his voice low, though I could sense the undertone of genuine care behind his words. I stopped walking, startled by the sudden question. I looked up at him, unsure of what to say. For all his power, for all his terrifying reputation, he still seemed to be offering me something I didn't understand. "I don't know," I signed, fidgeting with the hem of my sleeve. Maybe just a moment to breathe. Kai's lips curled upward in a small, almost amused smile. "I'll give you as many moments as you need. But don't get too comfortable. This palace is full of surprises. You'll learn soon enough that not everything is as it seems here." I wasn't sure what that meant, but before I could ask, he turned and gestured toward a staircase that led to a set of enormous doors at the top. "That's your room, Scarlet. Feel free to rest. You'll need your strength for tomorrow." My heart skipped a beat. My room? I couldn't stop the incredulity from slipping into my hands when I signed. "Wait, you mean I get my own room?" Kai raised an eyebrow, his gaze amused. "Of course. You're not a prisoner here. You're my guest." I didn't quite believe him, but the sincerity in his eyes made me hesitate before I responded. "You really are different, aren't you?" Kai's smile widened slightly, and he leaned in just enough for me to catch a glimmer of something familiar in his expression, a hint of self-deprecation, a touch of humor. He said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I like to think I am." For the first time since arriving at the palace, I felt a flicker of something other than dread. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this than I had initially thought. What do you think of the palace and Kai's attitude towards Scarlet so far? Do you think he has a hidden agenda, or is there more to him than meets the eye? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you're loving the story so far. You won't want to miss what happens next. The first few hours in the capital felt like I was living in a dream, a very strange, slightly claustrophobic dream. I'd been given a room far grander than I'd ever imagined I would have, with silk curtains, soft golden light filtering through the windows, and furniture so plush it felt like they had accidentally left the horse-drawn carriage out front and intended for me to sleep in it instead. But even with all the luxury surrounding me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I spent the next hour pacing the room, running my fingers over the golden-trimmed frames on the walls, occasionally glancing at the bed like it was going to swallow me whole. I'd never had so much space to myself in my entire life. In my old home, I shared a room with my mother, one that was too small, too cramped, too suffocating.
But here, it felt like I could breathe. I just didn't know if I was ready for the air I was supposed to be breathing. Was I a guest, or was I a prisoner? I couldn't quite tell. I tried to focus on the luxurious space, on the warmth of the soft wool rug beneath my bare feet, but my thoughts kept wandering back to the man who had brought me here, the Alpha King. I hadn't spoken to him much since we arrived. He'd offered me a chance to rest, but my mind was far too active to settle. When the door to my room opened, I was startled. I quickly turned, my heart pounding, but then I saw him, Kai. He stood there in the doorway, his tall form almost filling the space, his silver eyes gleaming with that same unreadable intensity I had grown so accustomed to. His presence filled the room, dominant, yet somehow not threatening. It was like he was waiting for me to acknowledge him, but not demanding anything. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice low, but the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I couldn't decide if he was being sincere or if this was some power play I didn't understand. I nodded, more out of instinct than anything else. It was his palace, after all. It wasn't like I could tell him no. Kai stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He surveyed the space with a casual glance, his posture relaxed, but there was a sharpness to his movements that made it impossible for me to forget who he was. "How are you settling in?" he asked, his hands folding behind his back as he circled the room slowly. I didn't answer right away. His question sounded almost too simple for the storm swirling in my chest. How am I settling in? The better question would be, how can I settle in when I have no idea why I'm even here? Instead, I signed back, my fingers moving with practiced speed. It's a lot to take in." Kai's eyes flickered to my hands, his expression softening just a little. There was something about the way he looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. "I understand. This is a lot, Scarlet, but take your time. You're not expected to jump into anything right away." His words were comforting in an odd way, but they didn't entirely quell the unease simmering in my chest. His gaze drifted back to me, and I saw a flash of something in his eyes, like he wasn't just looking at me as his contracted bride anymore. "Tell me why you chose me," I signed, the question burning in me. It felt like the elephant in the room, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could avoid it. "Why me?"
Kai didn't immediately respond, but his eyes lingered on me, and I could almost feel the weight of his thoughts pressing in on me. He didn't seem ready to answer. Instead, he moved to the window, peering out into the night as the soft glow of moonlight illuminated his sharp features. "I told you before," he said, his voice quieter now, tinged with something almost vulnerable. "You're different. You're strong in ways no one can see. You have something inside you that I need. I've lived my life making decisions based on strength, on power, but you..." He paused, looking at me from over his shoulder. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone." I blinked, stunned by the rawness in his voice. He was always so composed, so controlled, that I hadn't expected this honesty from him. I wasn't sure what to make of it. "But I'm deaf," I signed, my hands trembling slightly. "I'm broken." Kai turned fully toward me now, his gaze softening. "You think that's a weakness? That makes you broken?" I nodded slowly, unsure of where this conversation was going. "You're not broken, Scarlet," Kai said firmly, taking a step toward me. "And anyone who has made you feel that way is a fool." He paused, his lips curling into a small, almost teasing smile. "In fact, I'm starting to think you're the one with all the power here." I let out a breath, caught off guard by his words. "How?" I signed. "I can't even hear anything." His smile widened just slightly. "Exactly. You've lived your whole life without hearing a single sound, but you've managed to find your own way. You understand the world differently than everyone else. That's power.
You don't need to hear to have an impact. You've already proved that. I felt a flush creep up my neck, my fingers stuttering as I signed. And what about you, the mighty Alpha King? What's your power? Kai chuckled softly, the sound almost like a rumble. I don't need to prove anything either, Scarlet. Not to anyone. Not anymore. His words hung in the air, and for a moment I wasn't sure if he was being completely serious. But then the weight of his gaze settled on me, and I realized something. He wasn't just speaking about himself. He was speaking about us. I watched as he stepped closer, his silver eyes never leaving mine. We've both been underestimated, but not here. Not anymore. I wanted to respond, wanted to question him further, but before I could open my mouth, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. A knock on the door interrupted us, and my heart skipped a beat. The timing couldn't have been worse. Kai's gaze flickered to the door and then back at me. Without saying another word, he turned to leave, his movements quick and efficient, like he was used to walking away from conversations just as quickly as he started them. But before he stepped out, he paused. "I'll see you at dinner. You have a choice. Don't forget that." I stood there in stunned silence as he disappeared, the weight of his words sinking in. Dinner. A choice. Was it really a choice, or was he just giving me the illusion of one? I had no idea what to expect from dinner at the Alpha King's palace, but I figured it would probably be nothing like the dreary meals I'd grown accustomed to in the Crimson Fang pack. No, this would be grand, probably extravagant, and me, I'd probably stick out like a sore thumb, deaf, uncomfortable, and unsure of how to navigate the world of power and prestige I now found myself in. I paced the room for a few more minutes after Kai left, trying to gather myself. The silence in my new space was deafening, yet oddly comforting. The sheer weight of the palace, with its high ceilings and cold marble floors, made me feel small, diminished even. But for the first time in years, I felt something else as well. Free. It was a strange, foreign feeling. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but I knew it was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. I wasn't my mother's burden anymore. I wasn't my father's disappointment. In this palace, I was mine.
The knock on my door startled me, and I quickly wiped my hands down my dress, smoothing out any wrinkles I hadn't noticed before. When I opened it, I was greeted by one of the palace staff, a woman who looked to be in her mid-30s, dressed in an elegant but practical uniform. She gave me a warm smile as she looked me over, taking in my obvious nervousness. "Your Highness?" she said, her voice soft but firm. "Dinner is ready. Please, follow me." I nodded and followed her down the grand hallway, each step echoing in the silence of the palace. As we walked, the air seemed to grow heavier with every passing moment, like the entire place was holding its breath. We arrived in a vast dining room, the kind that looked like it belonged in an ancient castle. Long, dark wood tables stretched across the room, set with gleaming silverware and towering crystal candelabras that sent soft light dancing across the dark wood floors. It was breathtaking, and for a brief moment, I felt completely out of place. The woman led me to a seat at the head of the table, which I quickly realized was opposite Kai. He was already seated, his posture perfect, his silver eyes flicked up from the papers in front of him as I approached. There was no greeting, no formalities, just that intense gaze, like he was watching me unravel. I took my seat carefully, glancing around as the woman excused herself and left the room. I didn't know what to say or what to expect from this meal. I couldn't decide if I was supposed to feel like a queen or if I was just an obligatory guest in his house. The silence between us stretched for what felt like hours. Kai finally looked up, his lips curving into something like a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile that was designed to be unreadable.
a mask he had perfected over the years. "You look uncomfortable," he said, simply, not even trying to hide the amusement in his voice.
I snorted, shaking my head. "You think?" I signed, my fingers a little too fast for the conversation to feel smooth. "I've never had dinner with a king before, or anyone quite as intimidating as you." Kai leaned back in his chair, a low chuckle escaping him. "I don't bite, Scarlet. Well, not unless you give me a reason to." His eyes glinted, a spark of mischief there that surprised me. Maybe I had underestimated him after all. "Not unless I give you a reason to," I signed, raising an eyebrow. "Are you threatening me, Your Highness?" He grinned, his teeth flashing in the dim light. "I wouldn't dream of it. Not unless you try to steal my food." I let out an exasperated sigh, but I couldn't help the small smile tugging at my lips. His humor was unexpected and oddly refreshing. It was the first time I'd seen a glimpse of the man behind the titles, the Alpha King facade. Before I could respond, the first course was placed before me, an assortment of delicate seafood on a fine porcelain plate, the colors vibrant, the arrangement nearly too perfect to touch. I glanced at it and then back up at Kai. "I don't know how to eat this," I signed. "I'm not used to this kind of food." Kai didn't even flinch. Instead, he raised an eyebrow and leaned forward, his hands moving in slow, deliberate signs. "You'll figure it out. Just eat what you like. This isn't about tradition. It's about enjoying the moment." I frowned, studying the seafood for a moment before picking up the fork. I hadn't realized how much I was overthinking the entire situation. Here I was, sitting across from a king, and I was more concerned about eating with the right utensils than anything else. "Enjoying the moment," I signed, biting back a small laugh. "You make it sound so easy." Kai's smile softened, just a little. "It is easy, once you stop worrying about everything you're supposed to do. Don't worry, Scarlet. There's no one here to judge you." I picked up a delicate shrimp, hesitated, and then popped it into my mouth. To my surprise, it was delicious, sweet and briny with just the right amount of seasoning. I let out an involuntary sigh of satisfaction, and Kai's eyes flicked to mine with a pleased glimmer. "There, see?" he said with a teasing tone. "I knew you'd like it. Don't let the royal setting intimidate you. We're just two people here." I snorted. "Two people? You, the king, and me? I paused, searching for the right word. "The deaf girl who's been sold to you?" Kai's expression darkened slightly at my words, and for a moment, I regretted the humor in my tone. I didn't want to remind him of the circumstances that had brought me here. I didn't want to be a reminder of the debt my father owed. "You're more than that," he said quietly, his silver eyes meeting mine with an intensity I wasn't used to. "You're more than just the contract, and don't you ever let anyone treat you as less than that." I felt a wave of something unfamiliar stir in my chest, something warm, maybe even a little hopeful. I wasn't sure why, but hearing him say that meant more than I cared to admit. For the next few moments, we ate in silence, the soft clinking of silverware filling the air. It was strangely peaceful, this odd little dinner between the two of us. The tension had eased, and for once, it felt like I could breathe in this place, like I wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. But then the silence was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hall outside. I stiffened, my eyes flicking to the door. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the presence that entered the room next sent a chill through me. One of Kai's advisors, tall, dark, and imposing, entered the room, his eyes flicking from me to Kai with a barely concealed sneer. "Your Highness," he said with a bow, his voice smooth,
but laced with something I couldn't quite place. Kai didn't look up from his plate. "What is it, Revik?" Revik stepped forward, his posture rigid, but there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't read, that made me uneasy. "There's a matter of importance regarding the Southern Territories. It needs your attention." Kai's expression hardened instantly. He stood up, pushing his chair back with a soft scrape that sounded louder than it was. "I'll handle it tomorrow, not tonight." Revik's jaw clenched, and for a moment, the tension in the room thickened. But he didn't argue. With a bow, he turned and left as quickly as he had come, leaving an almost oppressive silence behind. I looked at Kai, unsure of what had just happened. His expression was unreadable again, and I didn't know if I had missed something or if there was more to this situation than I could understand. "Tomorrow," Kai said quietly, his voice low. "Tomorrow, everything will change." The next few days felt like I was living in a strange limbo, a suspended state where I was neither truly part of the palace nor completely detached from it. I had my own room, my own space to breathe, yet I was constantly aware of the presence of everyone else around me. The servants, the guards, and especially Kai, who seemed to be everywhere at once, his silver eyes always watching, always measuring. Despite the unsettling nature of my circumstances, there was something undeniably magnetic about him. The more time I spent in the palace, the more I found myself caught between a strange sense of admiration and a growing frustration. He was an enigma, and I couldn't decide whether I wanted to peel back the layers or bury myself in the mystery and forget about it altogether. Today, I was sitting by the large window in my room, staring out at the rolling hills that surrounded the capital. The view was beautiful. Endless stretches of green fields interrupted only by the towering peaks of the Northern Territories. But as I watched the sun dip behind those mountains, the landscape felt cold and distant, like it was taunting me. Was I really free here? I signed to myself, my fingers moving with slow deliberation. Or was I just a prisoner in a gilded cage?
I wasn't sure. The door to my room creaked open, and I looked up to find Kai standing there, leaning casually against the frame with his arms crossed. There was an almost mischievous gleam in his eyes, but it didn't quite reach his lips. "You look deep in thought," he said, his voice low and steady. "You thinking about how to escape?" I chuckled bitterly and signed back, "Escape? From what? You've given me a room that's bigger than my entire house. There's nowhere to escape to." Kai raised an eyebrow, that flicker of humor still dancing in his eyes. "Good point," he said, stepping further into the room. "I suppose I should have given you a dungeon instead." I snorted, rolling my eyes. "Oh yes, that would have been much better." Kai's smile widened slightly, and for the first time in a while, I felt a little less tense. It was almost as if he was normal. The way he joked around with me, despite the world of power he occupied, made me feel like I could actually relax around him. Almost. He moved to stand beside me at the window, his gaze following mine out toward the horizon. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It felt familiar, natural. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, breaking the silence, "about what I said the other day, about you being more than just the contract." I stiffened slightly, unsure of where he was going with this. "And?" Kai turned to me, his gaze softening as he looked at me, really looked at me. "I meant it. You're not just my payment or my obligation, Scarlet. You're a person. You're important." I felt the words sink in, like stones dropped in a calm lake. The ripples of what he said spread out, and I didn't know how to process it. It was hard for me to believe anyone could see me as important after the way I'd been treated by my parents. To them, I had always been a burden, a disappointment. "You've been quiet," Kai said, his voice breaking into my thoughts. "It's hard to believe someone like you could mean that. I've been told my whole life that I don't matter, that I'm just broken." His eyes softened, and I could feel the weight of his words before he even spoke them. "You're not broken. And if anyone has made you feel that way, they're wrong." I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, the door to the room burst open with a suddenness that made me jump. I quickly wiped my hands on my dress, trying to regain my composure. Revik, one of Kai's advisors, strode in without waiting for permission. He was tall, with sharp features and an aura of cold authority that made me uneasy. "Your Highness," Revik said, bowing stiffly before turning his gaze to me. "We need you in the council room. There's an issue with the Southern Territories that requires your immediate attention." Kai straightened up, at once his usual relaxed posture vanishing in an instant. He shot me a glance, and I saw a flicker of something. Frustration? Annoyance? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Very well," Kai said, commanding as always. "I'll be there shortly. Please inform the council that I'll be with them in a moment." Revik nodded and turned on his heel, exiting the room with the same swift, confident stride. I watched the door close behind him and then looked up at Kai. The tension was back, thick in the air between us. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Duty calls." I felt a strange tug in my chest. "Duty?" I signed, feeling the bitter twist of something sharp in my gut. "You're always going to be bound by duty, aren't you?" Kai didn't immediately respond. Instead, he took a deep breath and placed a hand on the window frame beside me. "Sometimes," he said low, "duty is all we have." I stared at him for a moment, the words hanging between us. I couldn't tell if he was referring to his role as the Alpha King or something deeper, something personal. There was a distance in his eyes, a wall I hadn't seen before, and it made me wonder if I'd ever truly understand him. Kai turned to leave, but before he could step out the door, he paused. "Don't go anywhere," he said with a half smile. "I'll be back soon. We can finish our conversation." I watched him go, the door closing softly behind him. The room felt colder now that he was gone, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. I didn't know how long it had been since Kai left, but the silence in my room had become oppressive. Time had a funny way of stretching and contracting when you were left alone with your thoughts. And right now, all I could think about was what he had said to me. "You're not broken." I wasn't sure what to do with those words. They felt like an accusation, a challenge to everything I had ever believed about myself. After all, I had spent my entire life being told I was a burden. I had always been the defective daughter, the one who couldn't hear, couldn't fit in, couldn't be everything my parents wanted me to be. Now here I was in the heart of the Alpha King's palace, being told that I mattered. But it didn't feel real. Not yet. I glanced out the window at the moonlit hills stretching far beyond the capital. The cool night air swirled through the room, stirring the drapes as I stared into the distance. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt lost, and I had no idea where to go from here. It was then that the soft click of the door broke through my thoughts. I turned to see Kai standing there, his tall frame silhouetted in the doorway. His expression was no longer the easy, teasing one from earlier. Now it was more solemn, like he had just returned from a battle, not a council meeting. "You're still here?" I signed, raising an eyebrow as I tried to keep my tone light. "I figured you'd be off ruling the world by now." Kai let out a quiet sigh, stepping into the room with a certain heaviness in his movements. "I needed a moment," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Sometimes it feels like the weight of this kingdom never really leaves me." I studied him for a moment, trying to decipher the layers beneath his words. He wasn't just talking about the Southern Territories or the Council. It was something deeper. The way his shoulders sagged, the weariness in his eyes, told me there was more to his duty than I could possibly understand. "I didn't come here just to talk about business, though," Kai continued, his gaze fixed on the floor for a moment. When his eyes met mine again, they were tinged with a quiet urgency. "I came to talk to you." I felt my heart flutter in my chest, unsure of what he meant. To talk to me about what? He ran a hand through his dark hair, the movement agitated, like he wasn't quite sure where to begin. "I know I've said some things that might seem out of place, but the truth is, Scarlet, you're not the only one carrying a burden in this place." I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" His expression grew even more distant, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "I didn't want to burden you with this, but you deserve to know." I swallowed hard. Deserve to know what? Kai's eyes flickered, his silver gaze turning inward. "I'm not the man I was when I first became Alpha," he said slowly, the words feeling like an admission he'd held onto for too long. "The truth is, Scarlet, I'm not sure if I ever was." My heart skipped a beat, my fingers trembling as I signed. "What do you mean?" "He didn't choose to be Alpha," he confessed, his voice thick with the weight of his own admission. "I was born into it, just like you were born with your hearing loss. It's not something I wanted, but it was thrust upon me. And now I'm trapped by it, by my own title." I watched him in stunned silence, my breath catching in my throat. This was a side of Kai I had never seen. Vulnerable, raw, and painfully human. For a moment, it felt like the walls between us were crumbling. "The burden of this throne isn't something anyone can ever prepare for," he continued, his voice faltering slightly. "I've made mistakes, things I regret, and sometimes I wonder if I'm even the right person to lead the Northern Territories." I took a step toward him, my hands trembling. "But you're the Alpha King," I signed. "You're supposed to be the strongest. You're supposed to have all the answers." Kai shook his head, a small, bitter laugh escaping his lips. "The strongest? Sometimes strength is just an illusion. It's a mask we wear to cover up our fears. And sometimes, when no one's looking, I wonder if I'm as weak as I feel." There was a long pause as I processed his words. "Why are you telling me this?" I signed, my gaze never leaving his. "I don't understand. Why now?" "Because you've been through your own hell, Scarlet," he said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes. You don't have to carry your burdens alone, and neither do I." My heart raced as the weight of his words sank in. It wasn't just about our shared loneliness. It wasn't just about me being the broken daughter of the Crimson Fang Pack. It was about something bigger. We were both trapped in roles we hadn't chosen, roles that had defined us for too long. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him I understood, but there was something deeper gnawing at me, a question I couldn't ignore. "What if this isn't just about us?" I signed, trying to keep my voice steady. "What if you're trying to save me, to protect me, but there's more at stake than we both realize?" Kai's expression hardened slightly, as if the very words I had spoken had cut through some unspoken tension. "There's always more at stake, Scarlet," he said quietly, "and I've spent too long pretending that I have everything under control." The air in the room felt suddenly too thick. Something was happening. I could feel it. A shift. An undeniable change. And I realized then that we weren't just talking about our own struggles anymore. Something larger was looming on the horizon. And it wasn't just about us anymore. "I have to go," Kai said abruptly, his voice turning sharper. "There's something I need to handle. You'll understand soon enough." Before I could respond, he was gone, just like that, leaving me standing there, my hands trembling in the stillness of the room. I could feel the weight of the silence settling around me as I stood in the middle of the room, my hands still trembling slightly from the conversation with Kai. It had been hours since he left, but the intensity of what he had said hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "I've spent too long pretending that I have everything under control." Those words echoed in my mind, each one like a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. I had always seen him as invincible, the Alpha King who commanded the Northern Territories with a ruthless hand. But now, seeing that vulnerability in him, I couldn't help but wonder how much of his power was built on a foundation of fear. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but a part of me was hesitant. He had just opened up to me in a way that no one ever had before, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to delve into the abyss of his past. His burdens felt as heavy as mine, and for the first time, I realized we weren't that different. He had his own demons, his own scars, and I was just another piece in a much larger puzzle. The quiet knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The soft, measured steps of the guards, the way the door creaked open just enough to allow someone in. There was only one person who would enter without so much as a whisper of sound. "Your Highness," Revik's voice was clipped, formal as always. "Alpha King Kai requests your presence in the council room. There are matters of great importance." I nodded without a word, my fingers curling into fists as I stood up from the chair. This wasn't the first time I'd been summoned by the Alpha King, but today felt different. The air was charged, as if everything had shifted just enough for something to happen, something that had been building for too long. Revik led the way down the corridor, his pace brisk and unwavering, as if the urgency in his step matched the tension that I could feel creeping up in my chest. We arrived at the council room, where the heavy doors stood open. The flickering light of 1,000 candles cast long shadows across the walls, and at the center of the room sat the high table, where Kai had taken his seat earlier that week. As I stepped inside, I felt the atmosphere shift. The air was dense, filled with whispers and unspoken tension. There were murmurs of conversation, hushed voices speaking in low tones. The moment I walked in, all conversations ceased, and every pair of eyes turned toward me. Kai sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, his silver eyes scanning the room. His expression was one of quiet authority, but there was something deeper behind it, a cold, distant edge, as if he were bracing himself for something he didn't want to face. "Scarlet," Kai's voice broke the silence, though it was laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Thank you for coming." I gave a small nod, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was different now. I could feel it in the way the others looked at me, the weight of their gaze pressing down on me, as if I were intruding on something far more important than I could understand. There were 3 other figures in the room, 2 men and a woman. They were all dressed in regal attire, their faces stern and unreadable. They were part of Kai's inner circle, I knew that much. But as they studied me, I could see the subtle disapproval in their eyes. To them, I was nothing more than an outsider, a mere pawn in a game of power. Kai turned his gaze back to me. "There's been a development," he said slowly, his voice heavy. "A threat from the Southern Territories has escalated. We've tried to handle it quietly, but now it's out of our control, and it's only a matter of time before it reaches our doorstep." A chill ran down my spine. "A threat?" I signed, my fingers moving quickly, unable to mask my confusion. What kind of threat? One of the men at the table, a tall figure with dark hair and sharp features, spoke up, his voice low but commanding. "There are rumors of a rebellion. Factions from the southern territories are rising up against the Alpha King's rule, and they've begun recruiting wolves from nearby packs. It's spreading quickly. I felt a sickening knot form in my stomach as the weight of his words sank in. Rebellion. Factions? This was no longer about my position here in the palace, or even the debt my father had owed to the crown. This was about a threat that could tear everything apart. Kai met my gaze, his eyes steady, but filled with a fire that made my heart race. We're on the brink of war, Scarlet. This is bigger than you or me. A wave of anger washed over me, and before I could stop myself, I signed, "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? Why keep me in the dark?" The room fell silent as my words echoed through the space. The tension in the air thickened, and for a moment I thought I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but Kai didn't flinch. Instead, his gaze softened ever so slightly, like he was finally seeing me for who I was. Not just as a contract, not just as a pawn, but as someone with her own strength, her own voice. He said, "I wanted to protect you." His voice quieter now, almost too soft to be heard over the sudden rush of blood in my ears. "I didn't want to drag you into this war, Scarlet. You don't deserve it." "You don't deserve it?" I signed, my frustration building, my fingers trembling. "You think I'm some fragile thing you can keep locked away in a tower? I'm not helpless, Kai. I can stand with you. I can fight too." For a moment, Kai said nothing. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. But I could see the conflict in his eyes, the pull between wanting to protect me and knowing that I wasn't a delicate flower to be shielded. I was stronger than that. "I know you are," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But I can't ask you to risk everything for me." "I'm already risking everything," I signed, my heart pounding. "I'm already here, and I'm not going anywhere."
The room fell quiet again as I made my declaration, but this time the weight of my words seemed to shift the atmosphere. The advisors exchanged looks, but none of them dared speak. It was clear that Kai and I were no longer just playing by the same rules. There was something between us now, an unspoken understanding, a partnership forged in the fires of something bigger than us both. Kai stood, his posture shifting, as if he had made a decision in that moment. Then we fight together. The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings, whispered conversations, and hurried preparations. The rebellion from the southern territories had spread faster than anyone had anticipated, and the capital was on high alert. The walls of Kai's palace, which once seemed like a barrier between me and the rest of the world, now felt like a prison. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and every night I found myself lying awake in my vast, empty bed, staring at the ceiling. It felt like the world was teetering on the edge of something catastrophic, and I was caught in the middle of it. Kai had barely slept. Every time I saw him, his silver eyes were darker, more haunted. It was clear the weight of his responsibilities was breaking him, though he wore it like a badge of honor, like it was a burden he had to bear alone. But I wasn't willing to let him carry it by himself anymore. There was no denying it. I had come to care for him in ways I didn't quite understand, ways that terrified me. The relationship we had was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't easy, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. I wasn't just his bride. I wasn't just his payment anymore. I had become his partner, whether he wanted to admit it or not. The council room was filled with the sound of murmured discussions as I walked in, my fingers clenched tightly at my sides. Kai was standing by the map table, his back straight, his face a mask of determination. He looked up as I entered, his eyes briefly flickering with surprise before quickly settling into something unreadable. The advisors were all gathered around, the room heavy with the weight of their plans. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the word from Kai that would determine their next move. It was no secret that the rebellion was growing stronger, and no matter how hard Kai tried to protect me, the truth was that the danger was closing in. Kai met my gaze as I approached, his silver eyes intense. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade into the background. The advisors, the murmurs, the maps on the table. There was only him, and there was only me. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, his voice low. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I signed, my fingers moving quickly as I tried to keep the anger out of my voice. "You don't get to make that decision for me anymore." Kai's eyes softened, but the frustration in them was clear. "I don't want you in the middle of this, Scarlet. You don't deserve it. You didn't sign up for this." I took a deep breath, my chest tightening as I faced him. "You think I'm weak? You think I'm some fragile thing you can protect? I've been fighting my whole life, Kai, and I'm not going to stop now. Not when you need me the most." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw the battle raging in his eyes. He was torn, and I could feel the weight of it in the air. But then something shifted. His shoulders slumped just slightly, and the intensity in his eyes softened. "You're right. You're right. I'm not going to push you away anymore." I moved toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no turning back now. The war, the rebellion, the battle, it was all coming to a head. We didn't have time to waste. We didn't have time to keep pretending we weren't in this together. "The rebellion is closer than we thought," one of the advisors spoke up, breaking the moment between us. His voice was grim. "We've lost contact with the southern outposts. If we don't act soon, they'll reach the capital." Kai turned to face the table, his expression hardening once more. "We need to strike first. Prepare the armies. We fight now, before it's too late." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed his words. I knew it wasn't just strategy he was speaking from now. This was personal. The weight of his kingdom, of his people, was on his shoulders, and he was finally ready to do whatever it took to protect them. And now, I was with him. No more hesitation, no more second guessing. We would face this together. As the council dispersed to prepare for battle, I found myself standing by Kai's side in the quiet moments before the storm hit. He was still the Alpha King, the ruler of the Northern Territories, but there was something else about him now, something softer. He wasn't just the man I had first met, distant and cold. He was the man who had opened up to me, the man who had made me feel important when no one else had. "I won't lose you," he said softly, his voice roughed with emotion. His hand found mine, and for a moment, the world outside the palace walls seemed to disappear. Not again. I looked up at him, my fingers tightening around his. "We're not alone anymore," I signed, the words coming with the clarity I hadn't felt before. "We fight together. Always." Kai's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, a look of resolve crossing his face. "Together," he repeated, his voice steady and certain. The southern forces had gathered in the hills just outside the capital's gates. The once quiet hills now echoed with the sounds of war, the clash of steel, the roar of wolves, the cries of the wounded. The rebellion was no longer just a threat, it was here. I stood beside Kai, my heart racing as we prepared for the charge. The warriors of the Northern Territories stood behind us, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. We were outnumbered, but we had something the rebels didn't: unity. Kai stood tall, his sword raised high as he addressed his army. "This is our land, our home. We will not let it fall. We fight not just for ourselves, but for the future we will build." The ground shook as the armies collided, wolves howling and soldiers clashing in a fury of battle. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved through the chaos, my body moving with purpose. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for something greater. For Kai, for the future, for us. Hours passed in a blur of blood and steel, the sun dipping low in the sky as the battle raged on. And then finally, it came. The moment we had been waiting for.
The rebel leader, a towering figure in black armor, charged toward Kai. The air crackled with the energy of the final confrontation. I could feel the tension, the anger, the fear in the very earth beneath me as I moved to Kai's side, ready to fight by his side as we had always promised. With one final decisive strike, Kai cut down the rebel leader, the battlefield falling silent in the wake of his victory. We had won. The rebellion had been quelled, but the cost had been high. The bodies of the fallen, both allies and enemies, littered the battlefield, a grim reminder of what had been at stake. As the sun rose over the northern territories, Kai stood beside me, his face bloodied but victorious. "You did it," I signed, my heart swelling with pride. Kai looked at me, his silver eyes soft. "We did it, Scarlet. Together." And as the world around us began to rebuild, I knew this was only the beginning of our new life, the one we would build together.